Chapter 47. Naruto was up next after Karen had finished with the priestess's mask. To say that it was a shock that his mother had been involved with the keeping of the masks was an understatement. But he was grateful all the same, since it meant that he could get to know her a little better through the shared memories within the mask, along with what Kakashi told him and what he could ask Jiraiya when he got back from wherever he was. Once summoned, the pair of monks explained their ability to create a barrier had more depth than Naruto expected. When they were alone, they could only affect a small area or individual targets. But when they were together, they could increase the radius and then dictate how that barrier interfered with the world outside of it, creating a territory where they dictated what entered and left. That was their fragment of power inherent from their divine god, the manipulation of space, the distance between things. Supposedly, while donning it, Naruto could dictate the laws of space within the domain under his influence. He could make right be left, up be down, or stretch the distance of something that was 3 steps away into 3,000. That left the Reaper, who he was now sitting opposite of for the first time since that fateful day in the woods. It floated in the air motionless, scythe held down as its clawed fingers were laxed. The mask it wore, which resembled a skull with 3 eyes, peered down at him in an unsettling manner as its mental voice began to reverberate. "State thy wish, bearer of Uzumaki blood," it asked. "I want to know what you and the divine god mask that you serve as the messenger of are capable of. I am the reaper of that which is born of the melding of the physical and spiritual, that which is known as chakra." Its mask tilted downwards slightly, and it raised its scythe to a horizontal pose. "That which harbors it can be stripped of it and given to another. It is a modicum of the capabilities possessed by the one I serve, the god of death, whose domain is that of souls and balances life and death on its blade." Naruto felt a lump forming in his throat at that. The domain of souls, life, and death. Did that mean he could use it to bring back his parents and meet them for the first time? Swallowing the lump that rose in his throat, he asked the question. "So that means, if I were to put on the other mask, I would be able to bring back the dead?" "Do not entertain such folly," it warned, its grip tightening on its scythe. Hostility similar to when they first met bled off it in waves. Naruto raised his arms up to pacify it. "You haven't explained everything yet, so I was making a guess. Am I wrong?" Its grip on the scythe loosened slightly. "Life and death are intertwined. To interfere with the Pure Lands, to deny the dead their rest, and meddle with such a thing that distorts the natural order is a sin most grave that the god of death does not take lightly. To harbor such intentions, to intend to use it for such a method while wearing the mask would spell the end of you. Okay, so if you attempt to use it to bring someone back from the dead, it'll make the god in the mask mad. Which is why those that seek to house the god of death within them must transcend that desire," it stated. "They must accept that all who live will die, and the god of death does not play favorites. It comes for all in the end. Only then may they bear the mask to become death itself. You may perceive the souls of others through whatever protection they have in place, determine the time someone has left, project your own soul from your body and commune with the dead in purgatory, help a restless soul find peace, or seal it away, and so much more. Basically, it lets you do things with the soul, except for resurrect the dead," Naruto pondered with his lips pursed and his hand on his chin. The other masks dealt with things in the physical plane, but this one dealt more with spiritual affairs and was easily the most difficult to use compared to the rest of them. Anyone who wanted to use it would no doubt do so in order to bring back someone they lost. If you had to overcome that desire when the ability to do so was there, then wouldn't it be nearly impossible? Was it really meant to be used at all then? "Naruto-kun," Naru said through the speakers, stirring him from his thoughts. "The chakra readings are getting low from the last seal. If there are any more questions you want to ask, then do so now." "Right." Giving it a bit more thought, he found there was a single question left he wanted to ask. "Is it possible to use the mask to find someone who's missing?" "So long as they live, and you know their name," it said. "The name ties into the soul and is thus engraved into it." "Okay, thanks." Naruto gave it a slight bow of the head. "You can rest now." The Reaper went docile at the command, returning into the mask. The mask fell from where it floated and would have clattered onto the focal circle had Naruto's hands not shot out and grabbed it. He rose from his seated position and exited the observation room where Naru and Karen were waiting for him. "Nice work both of you," Naru said as he handed over the Reaper's mask. "We've got it all recorded. Now all I have to do is submit it to the Hokage and we can see where to go from there next." "Do you really think there are gods within the other masks?" he asked. "If there was anyone else there qualified to tell them, It would be the person overseeing the research. Who knows, she said cheerfully. Given that seals can be used to actually seal things within objects, it's not unfeasible that there are actual spirits or gods within the masks. It's not the like there is in precedents. He suspected that she was referring to what was sealed inside of him. All the same, they could just be artificial constructs created through the crafting of the different layers of seals. She paused to tap her chin in thought and smiled. Actually, that would be more impressive. Could you imagine what it would be like to create something artificial yet on par with actual gods that could breach the borders of life and death? For some reason, Karen looked uncomfortable as she took a step back from the woman and changed the topic. Either way, I don't think it's safe to use those sets of masks right now. True, but you can't fault me at the thought of communing with the ancient sealing experts who made them in the first place. So many mysteries could be solved that way, she sighed wistfully. Anyway, I'll compile all of this and then get to them to the Hokage. We'll probably be in touch later on to see if we can glean more from them. That said, she gave Naruto the extra slips he wanted and then escorted them up and out of the building. The sun glared down on them from above as they stepped into the light, having been down there for a while now. It was maybe around midday, if he had to guess, as they walked together down the roads that were busier than before. Naruto was still lost in thought over what he'd learned when he felt a slight tug on his sleeve. Pulled from his thoughts, he turned to look at Karen. What's up? When you asked the Reaper about using the mask to find someone, she hesitated for a pause to bring herself to say it. That wasn't for Anko-san, was it? Yeah, he admitted. It doesn't sit right with me that she had to stay behind for us to get away. And I remember what you said about how you felt, that it was your fault, so I figured, if we can use it then we could find her and bring her back. Thank you, Naruto. She brushed back her hair and smiled softly before changing the topic. So, what will you do now? I've got to go talk to Sasuke, he said, intending to keep his word to Sakura. Do you want me to come with you? She asked. Nah. He'll be grouchy enough as is because he's stuck in the village. I shouldn't bring someone else. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his key. Go ahead and get a copy of this made for yourself. She took the key from his hand delicately before leaning in close and giving him a quick kiss on the cheek. The pleasant touch of her lips spread through that side of his face and left him blushing as she pulled away. I'll pick up some groceries for dinner and see you tonight at your place. Sure, he muttered as she waved and then turned to leave down the streets. It took him a few seconds to snap out of it before he sighed to himself and went towards the Uchiha district. Sasuke POV. Thunk. 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 A trio of kunai nailed the center of the targets as Sasuke continued through his drills, training not only to be stronger but to quiet his mind. He was growing restless now that he had a way out of the village, ready to leave with a simple series of seals and be whisked away. But, at the same time, he was hesitating. There were still things he could learn from Kakashi. But if they were working on a way to remove the cursed seal, then he would lose that power as well. Was it worth the risk of staying just a little longer? Or should he disappear before anyone knew where he had gone? He'd be leaving behind everything within the village that belonged to his clan, and doing so, no, he'd be leaving behind the village itself that was established by the Uchiha. They were one of the founding clans after all. But the village itself would stand in the way of his obligations to his family, so it was a necessity in the end. It's all Itachi's fault that it's necessary, he thought to himself as he yanked the kunai out of the tree. Then he felt another presence closing in on him and twisted around, flinging it in that direction. Come out. Whoa. Naruto emerged unharmed. Upset, but unharmed as he held the kunai between his fingers. That was close. Do you just throw these things around when someone surprises you? Yes. He caught it as Naruto sent it back his way and then crossed his arms. Besides, don't you heal fast anyway because of that thing inside of you? As long as I didn't hit your head, you'd be fine. Naruto looked shocked at that fact. You know? I'm not an idiot, I can see chakra. Your birthday is the same date as the attack on the village by the nine-tailed fox, and it wasn't that long since we dealt with Gaara, Sasuke pointed out. Granted, he'd only pieced most of that together last night, but Naruto didn't need to know that. It makes sense that they'd have you talk to him since you'd be able to relate to him. His former teammate seemed pensive at that, or almost apologetic. So is that part of why you've been upset lately? That I didn't tell you? Sasuke scoffed. I don't care about that. We've all got our reasons for what we do. My question is, why are you here now? Well, Part of it's because I wanted to apologize because of what happened on my mission, being the reason why you're stuck here in the village. The mission Orochimaru was talking about, he reasoned. The snake Sannin had been vague, and no one else would give him details, but if anyone was willing to talk it'd be Naruto. If you're going to apologize, then explain properly. Naruto saw fit to do so and gave him the highlights. He'd been attacked by Mizuki and then went after his clanmate. From how he was describing the battle that came afterwards, the bone user had definitely gone into a second stage release with his cursed seal. Sasuke's mind raced as he listened while leaning against a tree, putting pieces to the puzzle with what he learned from Orochimaru. The man hadn't even been all that subtle in his wording about being a hypocrite if he faulted him for taking whatever power he could regardless of the means. Most likely his means of resurrecting himself was tied into the cursed seal in their hosts, which was why he'd chosen to appear now. Yet, at the same time, that same seal on the bone user was enough to push Naruto further than Gaara did. He needed all the power he could get if he was going to kill Itachi. He couldn't let that fear of losing his body control him, could he? Anyway, that's how we ended up like this, Naruto finished. So I think we're stuck in the village until they find where that creep Kabuto is and get rid of the cursed seals from you and Karen. And you're okay with the fact that they sealed your second source of chakra away? Sasuke asked. That power was the only reason you were able to last against Gaara and the bone user from the sound of it. Them sealing it away is the same as denying you a powerful tool you could use to get stronger faster. I couldn't control it and hurt Karen, Naruto pointed out. I'd rather work on my other techniques and focus on getting stronger with Sakura and the others than rely on the fox if I can. Sasuke shook his head. That line of thinking will get you killed. You shouldn't be picky with the means you choose to get stronger with. If I were in your shoes, I wouldn't be. I'd master it. Naruto took offense to that, his cerulean eyes narrowing and his voice growing heated. You can say that because you don't know what it's like. Imagine being swallowed in hatred that wasn't your own, unable to think clearly, and filled with the urge to kill everyone around you. The last 2 times I relied on the fox's chakra to that extent, I nearly killed Sakura and Karen. Would being stronger at the price of your friends and family be worth it? The last of the Uchiha opened his mouth to say that he would, but his lungs froze before the words could come out once his mind caught up to the hypocrisy. That would be no different than what his brother did in the end. Itachi killed his entire clan for the sake of gaining the next level of his Sharingan and intended on returning to claim Sasuke's once it was matured. At the same time, Sasuke told himself moments ago that he would be willing to get his hands on whatever power he could, even if it meant leaving the village behind. If he truly believed that thought, Itachi had already spelled out a way for him to get stronger with his birthright. And it was right in front of him. The temptation pounded at his neck, where the cursed seal was locked away, threatening to break free. They were alone. He had a way out of the village without being caught. Naruto couldn't heal himself quickly anymore and didn't have access to the 9-tailed fox. If Itachi's goal was to capture the Jinchuriki, putting Naruto down would be a hindrance to his plans as well. He could sever those bonds that Itachi intended to in a few years prematurely and gain the next level of his Sharingan to use against his brother here and now. Naruto was so unguarded he probably wouldn't need the cursed seal to kill him. He could simply put Naruto asleep with the eye of hypnotism and make it fast and painless. And the thought of it sickened him. Naruto was annoying. Frustratingly so. But killing him now, like this, it felt wrong. As much as Sasuke hated his brother and wanted power to surpass him, slitting Naruto's throat when he couldn't fight back like that would be no different than what Itachi did to his mother and father. And if he became the very person he hated the most in the world, there would be no meaning in living past killing his brother. Not when he'd have done the same thing he was condemning him for. Not to mention that, if he killed Naruto here, he would be hunted down by others who would ask him the same question that he asked his brother that day he killed their family. Maybe it'd be Kakashi, or Sakura, or even that clanswoman of his. But they'd all ask why he'd done it, and he'd give the same answer as his brother. Ignorant of what was going through his teammate's head, Naruto seemed to take Sasuke's silence as him being right and then continued on. Anyway, Sakura's been worried about how you've been going back to how you used to be. That's the other reason why I'm here. And what was wrong with how I used to be? Sasuke asked with a slight snarl in his voice. Naruto held his hands up. I'm just pointing out that you were kind of a jerk. And you were a buffoon who earned the title of dead last in our class, Sasuke said bluntly. Yeah, but now I'm a Chunin. Only because you went first and my match was interrupted, Sasuke countered as he placed his empty hand on where the seal was and willed it to calm down, forcing the temptation down. Maybe, Naruto conceded. But the point is that we've all changed for the better, so don't go back to how you were back then. We've gone through so much as Team 7, and we're stronger as a team like during the finals. Don't throw that away by isolating yourself. Let me ask you this, Naruto, Sasuke said to him. What will happen when you face an opponent you need power to beat and don't have it because you denied yourself access to that power because you were afraid? Would you be fine with the results even if it cost the lives of those you were protecting or those of us fighting alongside you as a team? Think hard, Sasuke warned him before he said something stupid. Because someday you'll have to make that decision for yourself. Will you remain weak and rely on others and risk getting them killed? Or will you do whatever you can to become powerful enough to stand on your own, even if that method meant making everyone hate you, including yourself? Naruto shook his head after a moment and his eyes filled with resolve. I'd focus on making it so that there was no need to fight. But if it came down to it, I'd focus on making sure that everyone was strong enough to survive, not just myself. TCH, only you'd think of something that naive. He turned and then started to walk away. I'll think about what you said with Sakura, but I'd advise you to try mastering control over that demon within you. Otherwise you'll die without accomplishing anything, because you were a coward. He ignored Naruto calling for him afterward and headed back home to be alone with his thoughts. His obligation to the fallen members of his clan was not only to avenge them, but to rebuild his clan as a whole. It couldn't be rebuilt on the same foundation that Itachi had used to gain the next level of his Sharingan. Besides, now he knew Orochimaru's plan. As long as the Snake Sannin remained ignorant of that, Sasuke could make his own plans in turn. By the time he had nothing left to teach him, Sasuke was sure he'd have a way of dealing with both him and Itachi. End of chapter 47. Chapter 48. The Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi, sat with his pipe tucked into the corner of his mouth as he listened to a copy of the audio recording of the various masks' capabilities. His mind raced at the implications and revelations from Kushina and Mito's involvement to the presence of the death god. That one in particular caught his interest. If what the Reaper spoke was accurate, this could be the key to stopping Orochimaru once and for all, he said as the recording ended and swiveled his chair around to the front, shifting his view from the window to the living room of his home where his students were. Jiraiya was leaning against a wall opposite of Tsunade, who was seated on his couch. What are your thoughts, Tsunade? Jiraiya? You think it's real? Tsunade asked, skepticism thick in her voice. She had the blood of Uzumaki within her too, and her grandmother was the caretaker of the masks before, so she had a right to know these things as well. Not to mention they could be the key to allowing the first and second to return to their eternal rest. For all we know, those masks could have just been exaggerating. It's not something we can know without testing, but it wouldn't hurt to have some faith, Princess, Jiraiya said in response. It's at least a better solution than nothing if it pans out. Sarutobi exhaled a thin string of smoke as he watched her brows fold into a glare. Her anger was palpable, but both of them knew for a fact that it wasn't directed at them. She had been seething under the surface since Jiraiya brought her the news of the first and second personally. Tsunade loved her grandfather and granduncle. To have them brought back as mindless killing machines was something that she'd taken hard. More so considering her enforced sobriety. So, while she wanted Orochimaru dead and them put to rest, she wanted an absolute solution rather than relying on faith, and that meant proof. Fortunately, Sarutobi believed that he had some form of proof. One of the techniques that Minato perfected and came to me with was a means by which you could summon the god of death and imprison one's soul within its belly. I didn't know how he came up with the concept of the technique. In fact, I was wary of it given how Orochimaru had dabbled in immortality, and I labeled it a forbidden technique. However, had Jiraiya not arrived in the village when he did, I had intended to use it as my final card to deal with Orochimaru should the need arise. Being sealed within the death god's stomach with Orochimaru would serve as penitence for not ending his life before he warped his soul to such an extent and threatened the village. It wouldn't be the best solution now, given what they knew, but it would still have bought them more time. Still, if Kushina knew of the masks and what they were capable of, then it was very likely that the technique was one of the Uzumaki clan, a method of harnessing the mask's power for a single technique. Tsunade took his words at value at least, which was what he set out to do by revealing that information. Okay, assuming it might work, we don't know the amount of chakra needed for them to function. If those kids put them on and don't meet the requirements, they won't get a second chance, and there goes the last people capable of using them. It seems Tsuda-san came up with her own theory on creating a means by which it could be feasible, Saratobi said, holding up the woman's written report and request. He passed it over to Jiraiya. See for yourself. It sounds like she's making assumptions based on the layers requiring a set amount of chakra to activate, multiplied by the number of layers, Jiraiya said as he skimmed it. It's sound in theory, if she can precisely predict a base number to know the amount needed. And she also proposed a seal that would be fixed onto the body, storing yang chakras similar to the prototype slips she gave to Naruto over a longer period of time. It would require human testing before it would be allowed though, and she needs express permission from the acting Hokage. Saratobi took a drag from his pipe and exhaled. I told her that I would consider it once I found a reference that would be liable not to cause anyone lasting harm. Well, off the top of my head, the only things that I can think of that would be viable are the cursed seal, the seal on Naruto's stomach, and the seal on Princess's head, Jiraiya said. The first is out because we still don't know all the mechanics of how Orochimaru worked with it, otherwise we'd be removing them from the kids now. Though we could bring her in on that one, and maybe she could use what she learned in that regard. And while Naruto's is holding the fox, which is composed of yang chakra from what we can tell, its chakra is corrupted enough to where the trace amounts in his chakra network makes the masks reject it unless he purifies it. Not to mention whatever mental hang-ups he'd have after his last mission. Didn't your sage training teach how to deal with such things? Saratobi inquired. Quieting the mind and such? Certain parts of it, yeah. But it takes time to learn, Jiraiya pointed out. And as for the princess here, she's been sketchy on the details of how hers work in particular. But, given that it requires chakra control well beyond what the average shinobi is capable of at the moment, I'm not inclined to think Naruto would be capable. Karen-chan might be able to though. Saratobi had planned on placing her into Shizuna's course as a student, if only because it would be a waste, not to with her being stuck in the village for the time being. He looked over to Tsunade. Your thoughts? Tsunade shook her head. I designed my seal specifically for someone who doesn't have an ability like hers. There's no telling how the two would interact with one another without testing, and even then there's still a number of other risks. In a worst-case scenario that doesn't kill her, she may lose her inherent ability, and that would be a waste from a purely medical standpoint since you'd be taking away the ability to save the living for the dead. That just leaves you then, Jiraiya said. You're descended from their clan by your grandmother's side, and the Senju are also distant relatives of the Uzumaki. Your claim would be pretty strong. She glared at him again. Jiraiya, you heard that last part. I am the last person in this world who wouldn't be tempted to raise someone from the grave if the opportunity for a perfect resurrection was in front of me. Even if the only cost would be my own life. Don't say that. Jiraiya's demeanor changed, and his voice grew harsher. Neither Dan nor Nawaki would want to hear that. Her glare turned venomous at the mention of those two, and Saratobi suspected it was only by the thinnest margin that she didn't leap up to try and bash in his skull. The point, she said through clenched teeth, I'm making is that your brat is the most suited for it, and there's no telling how many years it'll be before he's capable of doing that, if ever. Rather than staking their lives on relics of a clan that's all but gone, you need to find another way. Saratobi didn't think she was exactly wrong. It wasn't fair to place so much on the shoulders of those two, but it was still a chance to deal with Orochimaru once and for all. Regardless, there's still another matter to discuss. Jiraiya, you can't keep delaying it. Jiraiya sucked in a sharp breath, his chest expanding and tension threading his body. I can't take the hat yet. Orochimaru is still out there. I am not long for this world, Jiraiya, Saratobi told him. I would rather spend my remaining time with my son and grandson, knowing that I have left a suitable candidate in the position. I know, sensei. The Toad Sage sighed. I thought that I had closure when Orochimaru was dead, and that I was ready. But he's still out there, more dangerous than ever. If I take the hat, I won't be able to leave the village to chase him down or train Naruto to deal with Akatsuki. There are many who would welcome you to the position right now. But the longer you take, the more people will doubt that you have the determination and desire to watch over and protect them, Saratobi warned him. I suspect even now there are others who oppose my desire and will move against you in the shadows. Brute base. Danzo Shimura was patient as he sat within one of his underground bases located within the leaf, a hand on his cane and back straight, while flanked by two of his root-trained Danbu. He was awaiting the arrival of the men he'd sent out in response to a message that he received earlier in the morning from one of his contacts. It was a message requesting a meeting with Orochimaru, who had revived himself and sought an alliance to kill Hiruzen and Jiraiya. In the grand scheme of things, Orochimaru had been the greatest failure to ever come out of Root. Those trained within Root were supposed to be loyal to him, who was in turn loyal to the village that he had served since shortly after its founding. With his brilliance, much good could have been done in service to their village. Alas, now he haunted them. I should have had him killed the moment Hiruzen cited that he had become too power-hungry, he thought to himself as he recalled the meeting to determine the fourth Hokage at the time. If he'd looked closer, Danzo would have seen the signs earlier that Orochimaru couldn't be trusted. But he always felt he could use the madman a little more, giving him just a little more space to act on his own accord. Never again would he make that mistake. Especially after he had the audacity to resurrect the second Hokage, whom Danzo and Hiruzen had served under, as a weapon against the village he died to protect. That was unforgivable, spitting in the face of self-sacrifice that encompassed what a shinobi should be. Naturally, the contact had to be terminated after they obtained the proposed meeting place and arranged it. They couldn't risk having such a vulnerable spot in their network. But at the very least, if his men succeeded where the others failed, then that was good enough to warrant the sacrifice. The doors to the chamber opened with the arrival of Fu and Orun, two of his most valued agents. They took their place before him and kneeled. Using his Sharingan, he inspected them subtly for any influences of foreign chakra or signs of mind control. It never hurt to be cautious after all. Aside from the injuries beneath their bandages that they kept hidden away, there were no traces. Report. The meeting was also an ambush, it seems, Fu said. They used some kind of technique to masquerade others under the appearance of Orochimaru and Kabuto Yakushi even with our measures. And when we set out to eliminate them, they exploded into thousands of serpents and we were beset by some of his troops bearing cursed seals or humanoid animal forms. We managed to eliminate them, but a number of ours died in the process, and most of us were bitten and treated for poisoning. Though his face remained an impassive stony mask, he couldn't help but have his fingers tighten around his cane at the fact that both of the traitors to Root had eluded death once more. However, his men were not to blame. They had performed their tasks as expected, to the best of their abilities, and he couldn't afford needless deaths at the moment. Ensure that all of their injuries are properly seen to, as well as your own, he said as he rose from his seat, towering over the kneeling shinobi. I want them ready to move the moment we find another trace of either of the traitors. They cannot be allowed to threaten the village further. Yes, sir, they replied in unison as he turned to leave. There was nothing further to discuss. As Danzo made his way to the exit of the base, his thoughts drifted to that meeting to determine the fourth Hokage again, and the position itself. Hiruzen wouldn't live much longer. Danzo could see it every time they met, how he struggled to keep himself sitting straight to maintain the image of vigil. If not for Tsunade, masquerading as that new aid of his under a transformation that he could easily peer through with his implanted Sharingan, he suspected that his elderly teammate would have already been on death's door. Though the death of his childhood friend would be unpleasant, Hiruzen was fortunate as it was to have lived as long as he had, when no Hokage before him had such luxury. But his long life and this fragile peace had dulled his understanding of what it meant to be a shinobi and made him soft. It was a mercy that he would die in his bed while clinging to his naive ideals rather than seeing them crushed as the village burned. The issue was his successor. To become the new Hokage, one needed to be elected with the consent of the Fire Daimyo, fostering goodwill between them to prevent a situation like what happened to the previous Wind Daimyo. However, many people had their disagreements with his methods that were known, so Danzo was unlikely to attain the position using that method. Even if he used Kotomasakami to sway them, if they suspected that mind control was involved, then there were a number of ways to check for the influence of it within the village. The only way it would properly work was if it was made clear that Hiruzen's softness was weakening the village. The failed invasion would have been a potential avenue for that. However, with Jiraiya's public actions during that invasion attempt, he was the most likely candidate. Leaving aside his more deplorable habits, Jiraiya was a somewhat capable shinobi if Danzo had to admit. Far more than someone who ran away from their duty like Tsunade, though her medical skills were still valued. He managed an independent spy network that was exceedingly difficult to pin down or infiltrate, had secured an alliance with the Toads to the Hidden Leaf Village, and had numerous war accomplishments to his name. Most importantly, he had been active in his attempts to kill Orochimaru and was one of the few that Danzo suspected would eventually prevail. That was part of the reason he preferred the man to keep doing that, as it would solve both of his problems. However, Hiruzen's misguided teachings have poisoned his mind, and many of the same issues born of the master's idealism would resurface during the student's tenure. Not to mention, Hiruzen had at least acknowledged the need for Danzo's skills until the Uchiha had to be purged. He'd even spared him after the admittedly hasty assassination attempt on his life a decade or so back, perhaps due to their shared history. However, Danzo suspected he would receive no such courtesy from the Toad Sage, and the man would not heed his advice, very likely leading the village to ruin. Fortunately, Jiraiya was hesitant to take the position until Orochimaru was dealt with. Despite there being other candidates, Hiruzen would stubbornly hold onto the position of Hokage until his choice consented or died. So Danzo had more time to plan out how to ensure their village retained its strength and became great again. But first he had to find where Orochimaru had slithered off to. And he would. Even if he had to comb every inch of the continent. Orochimaru hideout. Orochimaru laid down flat on a surgery table, an IV drip attached to his arm, to keep his body hydrated in preparation for the body modification surgery. It would be some time before he could transition into Sasuke's body, and ensuring that his current one didn't die before then took priority, now that news of his survival had reached both of the old fools in the Leaf. The island laboratory he was in now was secure at least, since it was only known to him and his most promising protege, Kabuto. "I really do wish you would stop struggling, Anko-chan," he said to himself as her chakra continued to resist being overtaken within him. Part of what made it possible to exchange bodies with a host involved compatibility, and the cursed seal's function as a secondary chakra source also carried traces of his own that would make it easier to overwrite should he need to use the body. That allowed him to easily supplant the soul and make his own dominate. However, while Anko's body was compatible, she hadn't used her cursed seal since he'd given it to her, and thus it was taking time to overwrite hers entirely. Made worse was the fact that he was attempting to do so using the little chakra of his own he'd reabsorbed from the other cursed seal holders in his other base, stripping the prisoners of them to become a little more whole. It wouldn't be a stretch to say that his current state was akin to a snake that had devoured particularly large prey, leaving him to rest as he digested it. The door to the room opened as Kabuto approached. He had a tray of medical tools at his disposal in preparation for the modifications. The plan went as expected on both ends, Lord Orochimaru, Kabuto reported. Both of the Hokage are within the sealed hall and Danzo's men have been infected. Once the cells finish propagating and overwriting their own, they'll be ready for use, and we can proceed to phase 2. Excellent, Orochimaru said to that. And what of our most prominent sleeper in the village? He'd have to remember to thank Sasori for that technique. Granted, he'd modified the current version more to his liking, only breaking the seal temporarily when a signal was sent out by one of Kabuto's relay serpents. But it served well for the purposes of having their remaining spies within the village stay undetected. And what better spy was one that didn't know they were a spy at all until needed? They remain undetected, he reported. The relay serpent will have their next report soon, though I am still working on attaining the information they requested. The necessary samples are proving difficult to sort through and use impure world resurrection on, given how they were buried and the rate of decomposition. But I suspect everything will be ready before long. A slight hum left Orochimaru's mouth in satisfaction at the development. Soon all the pieces would be in place, and this time he would make sure that the Leaf Village was destroyed. Not just by overwhelming force, but by poisoning the very roots hidden in the dark and rotting it from the inside out. End of chapter 48.